I want to fix my sloppy anatomy in my drawings once and for all, and in this video, instead of doing my regular studies, I'm going to get some actual help. That's why I signed up for Hide's master figure drawing class on Colosso. I'll also be going through over 20 hours of content packed with exercises, step-by-step demos, and a glimpse into the mind of a professional animator. I'll share what I learned and compile what I think was the most useful takeaways from Hide's class. Let's go. Before we dive into the absolute goldmine of knowledge in Hide's course, I actually reached out to Colosso and they're very kind to offer you guys an insane 30% off of Hide's course I'm showcasing in this video, or $45 off any course on Colosso's website. All the links will be in the description. Back to the video. To draw anything, we have to first understand the subject we're trying to draw, and instead of diving straight into remembering complicated muscle names, how they're connected, and all this jargon, Hide immediately starts tackling the quintessential topic when it comes to human characters: proportions. I followed the same method to divide my figures and started following along Hide's videos. The way I personally studied from his course is I first copied the reference Hide was using in his videos, following along his steps completely, or try to. Then, I did a few more drawings using the references that I found myself. That way, I get to practice and apply the theories I learned without the step-by-step guide. These methods he was using aren't the most groundbreaking things I've ever seen, but what I found most useful was the way he used these techniques in tandem and explaining his thoughts as he goes about constructing the figures from scratch. The real valuable part is the application of the theory, because let's be honest, 99% of the basic theory stuff is just a Google away these days. And I also have to keep reminding myself to follow Hide's steps fully, because as someone who's been drawing for a long time, I tend to revert back to my own ways, and that's not really how you learn. Using the major joints as landmarks, Hide divides the figure into chunks and measure it roughly to draw in proportion. This is also the first time I've seen someone merging the main action line of the pose with a proportion divider like this. I never thought about doing that, so that's pretty cool. We're also starting to do some simple gesture drawings using the simplified mannequins to get a feel of the whole body, how it moves, and most importantly, practice constructing the figure over and over again so all that theory can sink in. And this pretty much sets us up for a more challenging exercise later on, and what I consider the point most people are stuck on. When I first started drawing characters in perspective is probably one of the hardest things ever, which is why here, Hide really dials in with the basics of perspective. I mean, there's like close to 6 hours of this stuff. It's crazy. But essentially, you want to focus on thinking of the body as a series of blocks and simplify the form into low poly versions. He emphasized doing a lot of these rotating exercises to help us understand foreshortening and how the form behaves in general in different angles. And now with all the techniques I learned throughout the course, I started using them in tandem and was able to construct basic figures in perspective. I also noticed that Hide doesn't really care about drawing the perfect lines here, as long as they're good long strokes with energy. I think another really underrated thing he does is how he reminded us the basics about holding a pen and drawing lines at the very beginning of the course. It's one of those things where you go, like, why would you include something like that in an anatomy/figure drawing course? But it really does make a difference in how your drawing will look at the end. Anyways, I grinded quite a few poses from this, copying the same reference that was used in the course and adding a few of my own to see if I can apply the techniques. And here, I actually noticed a few common mistakes I was making that was not mentioned in Hide's course. First up, I didn't really set up any grids before going into the drawings because, well, I was a little lazy, but I think it's quite important to do that at first so that you don't get confused while you're drawing. Or you could do what I'm doing here so that you at least get some sort of guide for the perspective lines. Also, I was sometimes distracted by the details of the reference, like for example how the clavicles are higher on this side in this reference. I always wanted to capture those sort of details so much that it threw off the balance of the figure. You have to remember that this is a low poly figure, so the joint movements will be much more limited. Trying to imitate the movement fully means that you have to add extra curves and joints to make it work. It's fine to do it, but that's not what Hide is trying to do here. He's trying to progress slowly so that we level up our basics first before doing more detailed breakdowns like this. At the very end of the perspective section, Hide started doing this full perspective scene that involves multiple characters. Now, this exercise really tests your perspective skills because you have to manage multiple characters and place them in the same space. Note that at this stage you don't really want to pose the characters because I mean, if you like being tortured, no one's stopping you. And once we're done with all the perspective stuff, Hide finally started to talk about the individual anatomy parts and how to draw them. Throughout the course so far, he has been emphasizing repeatedly not to overcomplicate this part, because remembering the names of each muscle isn't really the end goal for us artists. Your goal is to be able to draw them, not recite their names. And here, Hide's main goal is to simplify the forms down and connect them in a way that's easy for us to understand. Using the basic mannequin earlier, Hide started breaking down the figure into parts. Here he's basically given us a rundown on how he would go about constructing the parts and what to include or exclude in our drawings. The same techniques like these construction lines here from earlier are used to help with perspective and as a guide to the form. As for understanding the form, Hide really likes to separate things into chunks logically. For example, this skull was separated into the top part, which quote looks like a lopsided egg, and then you get the lower part here, which looks more like a cube. The structure of each part was also explained in extensive detail, while Hide is rotating these forms around like this to give us a more complete 3D understanding. He's basically showing us how the construction works at all angles here. I'll be honest, this part is by far the hardest part for me, just because how accurate you have to be with it, and also remembering all the steps of the construction. The rotation just makes everything even harder to keep up with, and seeing Hide do this on screen so casually is nothing but demoralizing. But I guess we're supposed to practice these again and again for them to stay in our heads, and it's actually quite intuitive once I get a hang of it. This whole anatomy section is also quite long and detailed, as Hide carefully goes through each body part using this format you see on screen and explain his thoughts while he was drawing every step of the way. And finally, using everything I learned, I tried drawing some full figures using these references. Using the techniques Hide mentioned in the gesture drawing section and the last section, I quickly blocked out the pose of the character. And here, a very underrated thing that I personally recommend to do is drawing the same pose multiple times. This pose that I tried drawing has this forward motion and an aggressive swing of the arms. The first attempt was not bad, but it was looking a little stiff, so I redrew it with this arm swing motion and the twisting of the torso in mind. Using a line like this to signify the center of the mass of the body, we can rearrange the core body parts like this around to achieve balance. So to emphasize that forward motion I was talking about, I was able to shift his weight much more forward so that he looks like he's dashing more aggressively. To do this, I lowered his torso a lot more compared to the first pass so that he's less upright. There's also this concept of overlapping, where the body parts are connected to each other through some sort of overlapping like this. This is very important information, especially if you're someone who likes practicing with simplified blocks like I did earlier in the video. At some point when you attempt to draw the figure in a realistic way again, you notice these weird areas at the joints where you don't really know what to do with them. The concept of overlapping is like the gap that bridges between drawing blocks and drawing realistic looking figures, and it's great to keep this in mind. What this practically does to your drawings is it lets you create these more accurate looking silhouettes as the body is moving around. If you're interested in learning directly from Hide, you can totally go watch all his free stuff on YouTube first, or some of the previews on Colossal before deciding to join the course to see if you like his teaching style. I think anyone can learn a little something from this class, even the professionals, but it is more geared towards the beginner and intermediate level. That being said, I did learn quite a bit from this course. Anatomy and figure drawing is one of those things that needed repetitive practice to get good at. Having this course sitting in my library is very handy whenever I need some guidance on drawing figures in the future. If you want more anatomy stuff, I have videos here that you can watch next. Subscribe and bye!